Welcome to Licensed RPGs. Today we'll be discussing Avatar the Last Airbender for the DS. Title released back in October of 2006 and represents a franchise that needs little introduction. It has spawned a plethora of merchandise and even a live-action movie that bombed harder than Batman Robin at the box office. Plot-wise, the game is a filler arc that takes place sometime between books 1 and 2. On the plus side, this means the game is somewhat free from the restraints of continuity, but binds itself with the needs to have proper characterization for Team Avatar. As a whole, the actual plot of the game is rather monotonous and easy to see through, which might be because the main antagonist is introduced rather early on. Afterwards, the game tries to ham-fistedly distract the player from the obvious elephant in the room, and utterly fails to do so. As far as the action universe of the show goes, the game feels like it either gets a few of the details wrong, or outright ignores them. The biggest instance of the details being misrepresented comes in when the game refers to the air temple in quotes, as if there were only one of them, instead of many air temples spread over vast distances. On the flip side of things, the game feels like it outright ignores how the war machines utilized by the Fire Nation actually operate, by having the ones used in this game being entirely mechanical in nature instead of a tool used by a bender in order to make themselves even more formidable. On the other hand, the characterization of Team Avatar feels rather weak because of a lack of dialogue. In fact, you could probably fit most of Team Avatar's lines onto a single piece of paper. Though the biggest problem with the characterization, in my opinion, comes from a self-deprecating joke made by Kantara about her own weight. Not only does this joke feel entirely out of place, it feels like a poor attempt to stuff in a potentially sexist joke that serves zero purpose in the narrative. The bottom line is that this joke falls flat on its face and lands in the mud, which is a fate far too kind for it. So Toph comes along and tosses it over a mountain for it to land in the desert and is subsequently buried by a dune after a howling gush of wind goes roaring by and leaves this joke buried in the sands of time where it belongs. I'm sorry about that. The calm was gone, but now the calm is back. So it's finally time to move on to the gameplay elements in the order to watch this game fail all over itself again! Avatar the Last Airbender divorces itself from several traditional RPG elements and suffers for it, much like Final Fantasy XIII did. Two of these lost elements are equipable items and the ability to revisit a location after clearing a chapter. Another element that is lost is the ability to sell items, which baffles me considering you can purchase items from merchants in every single chapter of the game. And finally, the game seems to lack any sort of effective party management. Though I'll get back to the party management issues when I start to discuss my long list of problems with the AI. On the mixed side of things, the game includes a rather small amount of inventory space that can only hold up to 18 items. On the plus side, this forces the player to strategically decide what to keep and what to discard. On the downside, you'll find your inventory constantly filled with healing items, temporary stat boosters, and herbs that can be mixed together in order to create useful medicine or items that offer temporary permanent boosts to your stats. This can make the game rather frustrating to an extent since you'll need to constantly try and make room after the first couple of chapters. But I also find the herbs to be a rather mixed bag as well, since the game offers you no indicator on what any two herbs will make when mixed together. This will either force you to save and experiment, or pull up a guide from GameFAQs in order to find what the various herb combos create. Though on the plus side, the permanent stat boosters are rather useful, but I advise saving before using them as well in order to get the maximum benefit out of them, since they offer a range of boosts that are decided at random. And one other mixed bag issue in my opinion is the lack of random encounters. I guess I'm in the small minority that is fond of the classic random encounter system. Instead, battles initiate after you come into contact with the enemy on the overworld, sort of like Lunar Dragon Song or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. You're then launched into a battle area in order to duke it out as well. But I should probably get back to the combat and the AI at this point. Well, this game does use a real-time combat system. It feels a bit crippled considering how large the battle area is and how small your overall view of the battlefield is. This can lead to situations where you are being attacked by enemies that are off-screen and lack any real way to fight back since you don't know exactly where they are. Though to counterbalance this, most of the in-game AI seems rather weak and will usually follow the player around, leaving them vulnerable to hit-and-run tactics. On the downside, the AI for your teammates is equally crap, so they'll quickly rack up a lot of damage and require constant healing. And since you lack any way to control the AI, you're stuck with all the problems it comes with on default, like the inability to attack using special bending moves or weapons in the case of Sokka. This also means the AI lacks the ability to utilize an item when their health reaches a certain level as well. Though even if the inability for the AI to use special attacks wasn't bad enough, most of the special attacks are rather useless. Many of the special attacks take too long to execute and will be rented if you are attacked too early. This can make pulling them off when all the enemies are on screen and visible rather difficult. So you'll often find yourself firing attacks off while the enemies aren't visible and on the screen yet. And to top off matters, while Katara can learn a healing move, if you take on a certain side boss, you'll find the move to be a double-edged sword. Katara's healing move basically acts as a full revive, so you can't utilize it on teammates that have any HP left. But after Katara successfully dropped down to use her healing ability, she becomes immune to damage for a short period of time. But unless you're controlling her, she's probably going to rack up as much damage as the other characters, so you won't be able to use anyone but her after a while. And finally, the AI will tend to follow the action of the player. So if you try to sit back and use range attacks, the AI will follow you more often than not and ignore the enemy. This can make winning battles take longer and seem more difficult than they should be, in my opinion. Sadly, I'm still not done complaining about the combat because the game can also trap you in damage cycles, allowing the enemy to get in multiple hits, and you have zero recovery time after getting back up. The enemy knocks you down. And while these downsides also apply to your enemies, it doesn't make them any less annoying, in my opinion. Sadly, the only positives I have for the core gameplay mechanics is that you can save at any time and recover a percentage of your health after you win a battle. This can be used as a method of recovering your team's health if you have the patience to grind out an insane amount of levels, but I think it's time for me to shift gears and begin discussing the various mini-games. Formation is probably the most profitable of minigames, to be honest. In total, you can win 925 gold pieces from various opponents through the various chapters. On the downside, the game restricts you to playing 5 games apiece with any of the players willing to make a wager with you. But in all honesty, Formation is probably the best of the minigames as well in many respects, since it requires the use of both skill and chance in order to win. Though I do find beating the AI a lot easier with the latter moving P-chips later on rather than the early moving Fire Nation chips. The P-chips just require a basic strategy of building on the edges before trying to gain control of the center. On the flip side of things, the Fire Nation chips require you to control the enemy into placing a P-chip in a vulnerable position. This tends to be a lot easier said than done though with some of the later opponents because they're not stupid. Outside of Formations, you have a series of mini-games / side quests tied to the character Haru, who is added to the team to allow for some earth-bending action. Though sadly he makes for a poor fill-in for Toph. But on many levels his inclusion makes sense, since Toph wasn't introduced until sometime into Book 2. These minigames / training exercises for Haru can increase his stats and allow him to gain access to his ultimate bending technique, which amounts to throwing a giant boulder at the enemy. But it takes so long to pull off that it's almost worthless unless you got the other characters actively engaging the enemy. Of the 2 minigames associated with this character, the easiest one is currently being shown and relies on correctly timing your attacks in order to hit the circling boulder. The more difficult of the 2 involves launching boulders at rocks raised out of the ground. My only advice for that minigame is that if 2 rocks come up in the same set, only pick off a single boulder from that set and move on to the next set, since you won't have enough time to pick up multiple boulders from the same set if you want to destroy enough before the time limit. And finally, there's a minigame that can be initiated a single time by talking to the herbalist in the village that is only accessible during Chapter 3. This little minigame can net you some ruby fruit, which can increase multiple stats. Though in all honesty, all the other minigames are tied to story progression, like blowing through the microphone to open a door in the air temple, having Momo turn all the buttons green in order to deactivate the security on a door to the library, or sneaking past the guards in the library. Though the minigame involving the guards is probably the worst of the minigames, since you'll constantly need to rotate your camera angle in order to see the guards. Graphically speaking, the game feels a bit on the weak side, to be honest. While the sprites are usually identifiable, the lack of any sort of fine details, like the tattoos on Aang's hands, or a clear facial expression is rather disappointing. Sound-wise, the game is rather mixed in my opinion as well. The background tracks are alright, but not particularly impressive. But what probably hurts the game the most is the voice acting, which pops up so infrequently that it feels out of place. I guess my general opinion is either to go all in with voice acting, or not to have it at all. I wouldn't go as far as to say this game is terrible, but it feels like it betrays the source material a bit and ultimately feels rather skippable, which isn't that surprising considering it is a filler arc. But I also forgot to mention one of my other pet peeves of this little title, which is the fact that when you defeat enemies, you have to pick up the items or coins that they leave behind, and leaving this game behind is probably a good idea.